Welcome to Lattes and Laundry, a podcast created to keep you company as you fold the clothes or for when you take your well-deserved coffee break. Life at home, while never dull, can sometimes be a little lonesome. My hope is that this podcast makes you feel like you have a friend with you as you go about your day. I'm so glad that you're here. Hello everyone, and welcome back to Lattes and Laundry. I am your host, Emily, and happy Monday to everybody except for the person who came up with the idea to do daylight savings time. Like, seriously, why are we still doing that? It is Sunday when I'm recording this podcast, and I feel like I've been stuck in the mud, which it doesn't help the fact that I haven't really slept very good for the last few nights, or I've been kind of up late the last few nights, but seriously, who decided that we were going to continue daylight savings times? And especially if you're a mom, like, you know how that kind of throws everything out of whack. So far, I can't tell if it's affected my kids, but I'm afraid to say that for sure because I just know something will happen tonight. But the fall one where we fell back, that one, I could definitely tell that it affected my kids. So I'm just holding my breath that everything with their bedtime stuff stays the same this time because it's not fun. And all of my clocks now are set to the wrong time. And it's kind of funny because there was at least one clock that I never changed from the fall back. And then our power went out one night. So now that clock is just completely messed up with what time it is. And I'm going to try to change all my clocks today before we get to the next daylight savings time. And it still hasn't changed. So this is your reminder, if you haven't done so already, set all your clocks to the correct time. So in today's episode, we're going to talk about some books that I like, some books that really changed the game for me. But before we get started into that, I did want to give you our quote for today. This is a quote from C.S. Lewis. It says, "You can't go back and change the beginning, but you can start where you are and change the ending." And I love C.S. Lewis. I love all of his quotes. I love his books. So I really like this quote for a lot of reasons. This can apply to a lot of different areas of life. It can apply to your life in general. You know, maybe you didn't have a great childhood. Maybe you had a really rocky start to your life, but now you're in a position where you have your own family and you are building something that you didn't have, and you can really change the end of your story and break the cycle. Or maybe it applies to you in business. Maybe you have a small business that started off rocky and it wasn't what you wanted it to be, but you can always work. You just have to work forward and try to affect the ending because you can't change what's already in the past. It applies to so many things. But for me, I also like to think of this as applying to our days, like my days at home with my kids. Sometimes as moms, we don't wake up in the best of moods, and our job is to be there and take care of people's needs. And sometimes, I know for myself, sometimes I don't approach it with the best of attitudes. Sometimes, I lose my temper at the early part of the day, or about midday. I've just had it, and I lose my temper and I give in to the flesh and just sink down into that bad attitude. But it doesn't have to end that way. Sometimes I look at the day and I'm like, oh, I feel like I've already blown it. I feel like I've already just thrown this day down the drain. But it's like, I can start right now at 2:00 in the afternoon, try to reset this day, try to, get the train back on the train track and try to make it end better than it began. It doesn't always happen. Sometimes days are just rotten, and it doesn't have to do with anything other than that's just life sometimes. But I think that quote is really encouraging for me anyway, thinking about when I have a bad day. Like, we don't have to throw the whole day away because it had a rocky start. We don't have to throw the whole day away just because mom lost it. Mom can apologize and adjust, and we can move on. And same thing for kids. Like, just because the kids had a rocky start to the morning, that doesn't mean that it can't pick up and change. Maybe not always, but I think that's encouraging. It's encouraging to me. It's kind of like the quote from Anne of Green Gables where Miss Stacy says, tomorrow is a new day. Or no, she says, tomorrow is always fresh with no mistakes in it yet. It's like you can always look at that, like for a bad week, be like, well, today was a bad day. Tomorrow will be better. It's not, all is not lost. And I think that's really what the quote is trying to say. Like, all is not lost just because maybe you had a bad day or you had a rough start. Like, the ending can be better than the beginning. And I'm pretty sure that there is a Bible verse pertaining to that as well. I didn't write that down, so I don't want to try to quote anything, but I'm pretty sure there is a Bible verse that goes along with that as well. So let's talk about books. I made a list. There are 5 books in this list, and these are 5 books that really made an impression on me, books that really changed my perspective on things or encouraged my heart, books that really just changed the game for me. And so I wanted to share them with you. The first one that I'm going to mention goes along with some of what I just talked about in relation to that quote. This book is called Desperate by Sally Clarkson and Sarah May, and the tagline is Hope for the Mom Who Needs to Breathe. I read this book when I was pregnant with my second child. I really want to read it again because there were so many nuggets of wisdom in that book that I think would be really encouraging for me where I am right now in motherhood. But Sally Clarkson, most of y'all probably know who she is. She is a Christian. She's a mother of 4. All 4 of her children are grown now. But she's been in ministry for a long time alongside her husband, and she talks about motherhood, godly motherhood, just all kinds of really, really wonderful things. She has a podcast called Tea Time with Sally that's really good. You can find that on Spotify, and I'm pretty sure any streaming platform. But Sally just has so much wisdom to offer, and I love reading anything by her, and I've read a couple of her books. This one was by far my favorite because they were very vulnerable in the book and talked about a lot of the struggles that they faced in motherhood and really pointed mothers towards the Lord and how we need the Lord because we are just flesh and we have a sin nature and we struggle. And in order to be the mother that our kids need to be, we need that strength from the Lord. We need that help from the Lord to be the mothers that we need to be. And it was just really relatable because a lot of the things that they talked about in their own personal struggle in their journey of motherhood is things that I've already faced, in just my short little motherhood journey. My oldest is 4, so I haven't been a mother for very long, but so much of what they said just really resonated with me. And, as mothers, we have human emotions. We're only flesh and bone, and we have human emotions. And the book really impacted me on how, we have all these, fleshly struggles as humans and as mothers, but how we have to lift our eyes to the Lord for his help. And it was a very, very encouraging book. Like I said, I really want to reread it because I just feel like I need that encouragement again in my motherhood journey right now. But I highly, highly recommend it, especially if you are a mother to little kids. I highly recommend that book. The next book is Love Your Life, Not Theirs by Rachel Cruz. Rachel Cruz is the daughter of Dave Ramsey. I'm sure all of y'all know who Dave Ramsey is. But this book was specifically on comparison. And it was not all about money. There was, of course, Rachel Cruz is part of Dave Ramsey's company, so she talks about money. But so it was a little bit about money, but it was a lot about not comparing your life to other people. And I read this book when I was going through a season of kind of discontentment. I had something that I was feeling discontent about, and reading that book just really encouraged me. But also, I think it's encouraging too if you're going through some financial difficulties. It also has really good messages in it about, learning to be content with what you have, learning to be grateful, and not looking at what other people have. Learning to, like the title says, love your life and not other people's. So it was a really good book. I thought it was really encouraging. It really changed my perspective on some things and really helped me during that season that I was going through of discontentment. The next book is actually a series, and I've mentioned it on the podcast before, but it is the Madam Chic books that are by Jennifer Scott. You can follow her on Instagram and YouTube at Daily Connoisseur. And all that she posts is so lovely and so beautiful and so inspiring. The Madam Chic series, there is just magic in those books. Jennifer spent some time doing study abroad. She lived in Paris, and she lived with an aristocrat family in Paris that hosted her as a foreign exchange student. And she talks about how living with this family really impacted her, both in how she carried herself and how she dressed, her mannerisms, like all of these things that she picked up on, as well as just how the French live. And it's just such a wonderful book series. There's like Life with Madame Chic, Lessons from Madame Chic, Polish Your Poise, which is more of a etiquette book, but I still really loved it. All of those books, they really impacted me and really changed my perspective on a lot of things, and really inspired me in the style world. Like, it really inspired me to start developing my style, and just, there were so many helpful tips and ideals in those books. I don't know. There's just magic in those books. There's also another one that she wrote, and I cannot remember exactly the title, but it's for kids, and it's like for teaching manners and etiquette to kids. And I really want to read that one. I had listened to them all on audiobook, and they did not have that one on audiobook. So I need to get a hold of that one and listen or read that one, because I think I would really enjoy that. But I highly, highly recommend all of her books. The last two books on my list are both home related. The first one that I'm going to talk about is The Nesting Place by McQuillan Smith. I've read one other book by McQuillan Smith. It was called The Cozy Minimalist, and it was about how you can have a minimal home and still have a cozy home. I read that book back when I was kind of going through a minimalist stage with my house. If y'all have been following me on YouTube for a really long time, you remember that. And I liked that book, but I loved The Nesting Place. I thought that was a fantastic book for anybody who wants to curate a lovely home. The author has lived in over 13 houses, 13 homes. She's been in apartments, she's been in rental homes, she's been in dream homes. Like, she's really mastered the art of creating home wherever you are. And she talks about it from all different budget standpoints, because she's been in various stages of, financial plenty and financial little. So she knows how to do it from every budget standpoint, from any situation. She talks about being content. She talks about not comparing your house to other people. She gives a lot of little design tips. She talks about thrifting. She also talks about embracing the mess. If you're a mom of small kids, like how to embrace the mess, and, understanding that your house is not just meant to be a beautiful place, it's meant to be a lived-in place. And I just thought that the book hit every nail on the head, and I highly recommend it to anybody who is, wanting to curate home, but just not quite sure where to start. Maybe you're hung up on some financial stuff, or you just don't know where to start. Maybe you're not in your ideal situation, or not in your ideal dream home, or maybe you have a very tiny house. I highly, highly recommend reading this book. I enjoyed it. I got through it pretty quickly because I really enjoyed that book. And then the last one that I want to talk about, and I'm probably going to mispronounce the name, but I listened to it on audiobook, and it's Home Sweet Maison. I'm probably butchering that pronunciation, but basically it's the French word for home. So it's Home Sweet Home, but the home on the last part is in French. But it's the French art of making a home, and it's by Danielle Postel-Vignier, and I might not be saying her name right either. But she talked about curating home the French way. And I don't know exactly how to describe this book to you, other than it conjures up the most wonderful images in your head of a beautiful home. And I particularly like the parts where she's talking about her friend Jacqueline, and how her French friend Jacqueline decorated her home, and how cozy and welcoming and inviting that it seemed, even though it wasn't, like, it was different. It's not at all like the very plain gray and white style that you see so common Nowadays, it was just vibrant and colorful and full of collected things. And I just don't know how to describe this book for you aside from you should just read it because it's so inspiring. And there are some practical tips in the book, like just like basic tips on decorating the French way. But just the whole thing about talking about the French way of living is just so beautiful and inspiring and romantic. And I enjoyed every single second of that book. So that is going to do it for today's episode. I hope that you have enjoyed it. I hope that you will look into these books and maybe add them to your reading list this year. I highly recommend all of them. I will link any resources that I can in the description box down below. If you enjoyed this episode, please like this video. And also, if you know any friends that might enjoy the podcast, please send the podcast their way. I would really appreciate that. And also, if you haven't already, please check out the last episode. I had my first guest on the podcast and I interviewed my friend Hannah. We talked all about keeping your creative spark alive as a mom, and it was a really fun conversation. So if you haven't listened to that already, I recommend that you listen to that one too. Thank you for being here with me this week. I hope that you will have a good rest of your week, a good rest of your Monday, and I will talk to you in the next episode. Take care.